If you had met Sadi of Shiraz at a roadside inn sometime in the 13th century, you might have mistaken him for a merchant, a beggar, or a man who had just misplaced his horse. He had a look about him that said, "I have wandered too far," and eyes that suggested he knew exactly why. He was, depending on the day, a philosopher, a poet, a dinner guest, an escape artist, and once, a failed date seller. Sadi was not just a man of letters. He was a man of notes, doodles, napkin thoughts, and fully formed metaphors scribbled on fig leaves. He traveled far. He spoke with kings and was nearly eaten by hyenas. And yet, ask him what he was most proud of, and he might have replied, "I once convinced a warlord to share his bread with a flea-ridden dog. Poetry came later." Born in the rose-filled city of Shiraz, Persia, sometime around 1210, Sadi's real name was likely Musli al-Din bin Abdallah, which, if you said it 3 times fast, summoned either divine wisdom or a confused camel. He was raised in a modest but scholarly home where questions were encouraged, until mealtime when his uncle would yell, "No metaphors during soup!" His father died when Sadi was still a boy, leaving behind a collection of old books and one very dented lantern. From then on, the boy found more comfort in words than in people. He would follow travelers, merchants, and madmen through Shiraz just to hear what they muttered. Once, when he was 10, he followed a one-legged basket weaver for 3 days just because the man had a good story about how he once sold a carpet to a ghost. This, more or less, was his first literary education. Sadi later studied in Baghdad at the famed Nizamiya University, where students learned law, theology, philosophy, and how to survive on lentils for 6 days straight. His teachers were austere and serious, and they did not appreciate Sadi's habit of turning their moral lectures into limericks. "This is theology," they would groan, "not theater." But Sadi always believed that truth remembered with laughter lasted longer. He once described a grumpy teacher as a man so severe even his beard prayed for mercy. By the end of his studies, he knew Arabic, Persian, logic, and the quickest way out of a lecture hall. Around his 20s, Sadi did what any sensible poet would do. He vanished. For 30 years, or maybe 35, depending on which caravan you ask, Sadi wandered through the Middle East, Central Asia, and parts of India. He claimed to have been captured by crusaders in Syria, enslaved and later freed after digging trenches for years. Some say it happened, some say it didn't. Sadi said both. He wrote, "What is truth, if not a well-told lie made kind?" He walked through deserts and markets, slept in mosques and stables, and once traded shoes with a barber in return for a haircut filled with secrets. Everywhere he went, he listened. He collected stories like pebbles, poems like debts, and lessons like unpaid taxes. He once spent a week with a man who only ate cucumbers and cursed the moon. Another time, he dined with a king who believed he was a turnip. Sadi took it all in. When he finally returned to Shiraz, beard grayer and shoes thinner, he did not announce himself with trumpets or grand pronouncements. He simply began writing. First came the Bustan, the orchard. It was a garden of moral tales and advice, written in verse. Kings read it, bakers quoted it. One shepherd reportedly used a passage to settle an argument between 2 goats. Then came the Gulistan, the rose garden. It was prose, sharp, witty, tender, and sly. In it, Sadi wrote of tyrants and fools, lovers and liars, and most famously, about how humanity is one body. The children of Adam are limbs of one body, created from the same essence. That verse would one day be carved into the walls of the United Nations, but at the time, it was scratched onto a bit of parchment Sadi used to cover a crack in his window. What made Sadi different was that he mocked power without sounding angry. He once wrote, "A foolish ruler builds a tall palace with no stairs, and then blames the clouds for not bowing to him." People laughed. Even kings laughed. And if they didn't laugh, they at least nodded politely and didn't chop off his head. He was not angry at the world's foolishness, just fascinated by it. He seemed to believe that if you looked long enough, even the cruelest tyrant had a mole on his nose and a mother who worried he wasn't eating enough. Despite his fame, Sadi did not live in gold or marble. He lived in a small house in Shiraz near the river, where children would throw stones at his roof to ask for stories. He taught students not just poetry, but humility. Once, when a student boasted he had memorized all of the Gulistan, Sadi asked if he had memorized kindness too. "Because that," he said, "is the only poem worth repeating." He was old when he died, maybe in his 80s, maybe older. The dates are fuzzy, and Sadi would probably say that exact dates are for taxes and tombstones, not poetry. Today, Sadi's tomb lies in Shiraz. Tourists go, poets linger. Children still throw stones, not to bother, but to wake the words. Some say if you sit quietly, you can hear a whisper from the wind in the roses. Be kind, be clever, laugh often, and never trust a man who sells silence by the pound. If Sadi had been born in Ohio, he might have run a bookstore and annoyed librarians with his jokes. If he'd lived in New York, he'd probably have written advice columns for dogs. But he was Persian. He was human. And he remains, centuries later, the poet who listened harder than he spoke, and who left us not with rules but with roses,